Welcome to the 10th chapter of the Book of Esther, the last chapter. It's very short, probably one of the shortest chapters in the Bible. And it begins now with Mordecai being extolled, as it says, by the Jews, as we saw that he was robed with the vestments of second in the kingdom, and then he sort of reminds me of Joseph, who had the same thing happened to him when he went to Egypt, sold into slavery by his brothers, and then became the second to the Pharaoh because he interpreted the dream of Pharaoh. And here, Mordecaios, however you pronounce it, becomes second in command in a different way, but to the king of Persia, the Persian Empire, and he has this golden crown, the robe, and a purple diadem, a cloth diadem that goes around his head with the gold crown on top of that. And he has written the things that happened concerning the Jews. It mentions in chapter 9, along with Esther, and now it finalizes this whole episode after they developed the Feast of Purim, or Holiday of Purim, where the lots had to do with the lots, and they mentioned at the end of 9 about fasting. And my friend Rich mentioned to me that as far as he knew, the Purim today, they don't fast before it, but it was probably referring to the fasting that Esther and Mordecai and the Jews did before she went in to see the king concerning Haman. So now it says, and the king wrote unto the Vassalian, the kingdom, by both land and sea. And there's a vast kingdom, Ethiopia to India. And his strength and the valor, riches, and also the glory of his kingdom. So the strength, Iskeen, and the Andragathian of valor. Strength of the kingdom can be, I suppose, all sorts of strength, all sorts of different possible strengths as far as economic, military, and political, and so forth. Valor generally refers to the military, and he had riches, and the doxon, the doxology comes from that word, the glory of the doxology in the liturgy of the church, and of his kingdom. Behold, they are written in the scroll, in the Viblio. We have a Bible, comes from that word, the Viblio, of the Person and the Medon, Persians and the Medes, for a memorial. And it's too bad we don't have it today. We could read it, find out what all happened that the king had written down. For Mardochaeos relieved the Vasileia, the king, Artaxerxes, and was great megas, we have a mega, something that's large, was great in the Vasileia kingdom, and being extolled by the Jews, and I believe he still is today with Purim, and being fond to describe the welfare to all their nation. So a hero among the Jewish people, Mordecai. It'd be interesting to see where he would rank. We have Moses, ones I think of that were in the Jewish race that were these heroes of the Jewish race would probably, in my opinion, it would probably be Moses, and then Joshua, and then Samuel, and then of course David. Then after David, well, then we have some prophets, but they weren't really the leaders of the nation as such. Then we have a few kings, Josiah, Hezekiah, were two wonderful, good kings. And then we had Daniel, who I think on Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the prophets. So these were all mighty men. Then some of the, I forgot, Gideon, a few of Samson, some of the judges. And Mordecai, I am sure, is in the pantheon of the Jewish people. The end of the book of Esther pretty well ends the history of the Jews in the Bible. Nothing after this is in the traditional 66 books of the Tanakh, the Jewish canon. The time after Artaxerxes, it mentioned here a couple of the grandchildren of, that was in Nehemiah. So possibly Nehemiah, where it mentions a couple of the grandchildren, so somebody had to know who they were and had been around to write it. So that might have been the last writing in Nehemiah of the Old Testament, because it mentions these names, and it's getting close to the time of Alexander the Great. The last book, of course, was Malachi, but I don't believe Malachi was written as late as Esther was. Could be wrong there. So the end of the history of the Jews. Now, what we're going to do next, hope to go into what I call an Eon, a new Eon. I wrote this out today, and what I consider the 7 Eons of the Bible. Now, it's not extra biblical, but it's what is actually found in the Bible. And I'll just go through them here. I thought it would be a good place, seeing that we're going into a new Eon with this, the beginning of an Eon. Well, I considered the first Eon, I call it the Kairos Eon. Kairos is time, but it's more of a season. It's not Chronos. You can see down here Chronos. Kairos can be a season, a fall, a certain type of a time of a large covering, not 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or anything like that. And I look at this Eon to last from Genesis 1:1 to 2:25. I call it the geological Eon. It has to do with the earth being formed. Ge is the earth. The heaven and the earth and the seas were created in this period of Kairos. The luminaries in the heaven and in the firmament were created on the 4th day, and then living creatures on the 5th day, and sinless man on the 6th day. And then sinless man, there was no death. So now, if there was no death, then we don't know how long that period of time was, because he didn't die. And could have been thousands of years, who knows? In this whole period of time, even before man was generated by God from the earth, could have been who knows how long before man, because the luminaries weren't created on the 4th day, so you did not have a sun and a moon. So everything before the 4th day was made. It says there was light, but the light wasn't from the sun, because it wasn't created until the 4th day. Well, we know in Revelation that the New Jerusalem, I believe, will light the world, and so God is able to create light, and I believe that the sun is just more, I don't think the light comes out of it from nowhere. I believe that God has set it on fire, set something on fire. It's like it's like a candle that somebody has lit, and it's lighting up the earth and the stars and so forth. But the man didn't come along until much could come. This could have been thousands of years, tens of thousands. Who knows how long it was? But basically, the key thing here is there was no death with man. Even the female was made, there still was no death. The second Eon I see is the Chronos Eon. The chronos eon, we have the word chronos, chronology. It has to do with time. And I believe that began in Genesis 3:1, and it goes all the way to Exodus 12:42. And that time is when death, thanatos, enters with the fall of man, with the story of Adam and Eve. And then once death entered, then chronos began. And chronos, my formula for time is maybe a little different than some of the scientists have, but here it is. It's gamma to theta equals, that should be an X. Sorry about that. I wonder how that happened. I thought I had it right. Time equals, time is gamma to thanatos equals, I had the wrong letter, it's looks like an X, it's the he. And so the gamma is for genesis, birth in Greek. To thanatos, death, equals chronos, time. Your time, my time, everybody's time, every single person that ever lived has a different time. So time is only relevant to one person. My time is my time. Your time is your time. Nobody was born at the same exact second, will die at the same exact second. Identical twins, one comes out first, and even then if they both died at the same second, it would be very unusual. And if there was somebody born at the same time and died at the same exact moment, you would never know it with all the millions and billions of people on the earth. So this is the explanation for time. So it now enters. We have a person's beginning and the end, and this goes all the way till the end of time. Now, the second, the time of the chronos, which it begins, where death enters, is the time of the patriarchs to Moses. And this is a time that is pre-law. It's the time of the patriarchs. I could have put a paternal Eon also. Maybe that would have been better and more accurate than making it chronos and mentioning that chronos now enters into it, time, and paternal Eon, or the patriarchal Eon, which goes to Moses. And so we have Genesis 3:1. We have goes into all the sons of Adam and down into Abraham, and then down in through the Isaac, and then Jacob and the 12 tribes. And there's no law yet. The 12 tribes, they didn't have a law. The Abraham, there was no law. They did sacrifices and things that you would see in the law of Moses, basically, but they didn't have the law as such. When it talks about the law that I see, Jesus talks, it's talking about what happens in the next Eon, and that is the nomos, the law. The nomos Aeon, the law. And that goes from Exodus 12:43 to Malachi 4:6 as far as the Bible goes. Now, of course, the Jews continue being under the law, but this is not, this is biblical. So Malachi 4:6 is basically the end of the Old Testament, and this period of time, the law is working. And the first mention of this law wasn't until 12:43 of Exodus, where God says this is the law of the Passover. So this is the first mention of law by God. And that period of time goes all, like I said, to the end of the Old Testament. The fourth eon, I call it the Haris Eon, or the Eon of grace, the free gift that we are given through Jesus Christ. People don't have to follow the Mosaic law. Christ fulfilled that law for us, and we need to follow Christ and the things that he says. And actually, many of the things that he says are more difficult than just the Mosaic law. The main thing with the law of Christ would be love, loving one another. And this goes from Matthew 1 all the way to Revelation 3:22 as far as I see it. So that's the time of the free gift, the Haris. The fifth eon is the Kairos Thalipsios eon, the tribulation, the time of tribulation, which is mentioned in Revelation 4:1 all the way to 19:21, a great tribulation and all these upheaval of the earth. Now, there are things that are in between that refer to it in the Old and the New Testament, but this is basically an overview of that period of time. Because like here, Daniel 12:1 mentions the Kairos Thalipsios, the great, the time of tribulation, is it's called also. Now, it's also mentioned by Jesus in Matthew 24:21 and 29 is a time of thalipsios, of tribulation, if that's what you would want to call it. Then the next eon, after the time of tribulation, when it comes to an end, is the sixth eon, and that is the Helia Eti, the 1,000 years eon, and that is in Revelation 20:1 to 20:7. It's a 1,000-year period of time where Jesus reigns, I believe not on earth, but in heaven, with the ones that come out of the Great Tribulation, and they will reign with Christ. And I believe they reign in heaven, but on earth 1,000 years goes by, so it sets it off as a separate eon. During that period of time, I believe that the temple will be existing on Mount Meron, which is west of the Sea of Galilee, and which it mentions in the last 10 chapters of the book of Ezekiel. And the water flows into the Lake of Galilee, down the Jordan into the Dead Sea, and gives life to a certain part of the Dead Sea. But the southern part of Israel is wasteland, and we don't know what happens, but this is all in the book of Ezekiel. We know then, if that temple exists on Mount Meron, then it mentions in the last 10 chapters of Ezekiel of these priests. There's a priesthood, and they offer sacrifices, and they're for sin and for unintentional sins and so forth. So sin still exists. It's not a sinless period, but that to me is the sixth eon. And then the final eon in the Bible that I see, the seventh eon, is the Jerusalem Kainin. That is the New Jerusalem. Now, the New Jerusalem is a cube that comes down out of heaven, and that begins in Revelation 21:1. The New Jerusalem is not under Chronos. There is no death in the New Jerusalem. The people live forever, whatever. And but the New Jerusalem appears, and there is an earth, because it mentions that there is a new heaven and a new earth, but it still sin exists on the earth. Because it says in Revelation 21:26 that there is still unbelievers and people that live in sin, 22:11 and 15 of Revelation. So this would be, to me, the last eon. And The eon that we're going to go into next is going to be the third eon. I've already done Genesis, a video seminar, but years ago. I want to do it again, but I'm going to wait until I'm done and then go. First thing I'll do is go back to Genesis and redo it. But we're going to go into the third eon, which would be the eon of the nomos, the law. In Exodus, we'll begin in the book of Exodus, and then Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, where the law is given in those 4 books. After those 4 books, the law basically is not given. It may be altered in certain things, added to it, but basically the law was only the 4 books. Some people may say Exodus was too, but I don't see it that way. But that's the way I have it here, and we'll go into Exodus in the next video seminar, and I hope you'll join us and begin this trek of the Jewish sons of Israel leaving Egypt and going to the promised land. And until the next time, God bless.